Hello. Nice to virtually meet you.
Same. How are you?
Good. Oh, hold on. Let me just adjust the audio. You're kind of quiet. Can you say something again?
Test, test, test. I don't have to
Perfect.
put the thing on the mic. Is it better?
Yeah, yeah. I think I just had it set too low or something for some reason. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be talking to Dr. Melanie Uhde today. I was gonna say a very short introduction and then I wrote down 2 pages. So instead of that, Um, Melanie, please introduce yourselves in whatever way you'd like, including your dogs, of course.
Yeah, sure. I'm Melanie. I am in the dog education world, meaning I create a lot of content around educating, let's say, dog enthusiasts, whether these are owners or trainers, on the dog behavior from a very scientific angle, whether this is neuroscience that I'm mainly specializing in, ethology, genetics, epigenetics, just to kind of give a broader understanding of who we're sharing our lives with and not maybe get so hung up on what training method might be the best. I'm trying to keep it as entertaining as possible, but yet again, it is usually very much rooted in science without the bias that we often get. And I've been doing this for as intense as I'm doing it now, maybe for 4 years, but training dogs has been 7 years. And before that, I was for more than 12 years, I think. It makes me sound really old, but for a long time in academia directly doing research, publishing papers, writing grants, traveling, and yeah, and now I'm here where I'm at and living in California now.
Nice.
All the dog trainers accumulate.
That is
Um,
great.
and I have 3 dogs. I have one Malinois, one German Shepherd lab mix, and then just recently, as in like 17 weeks ago, I got my third dog, another Malinois that I'm raising.
Yeah, I've seen videos on, I think on Facebook. Very cute, of course. Cute
Yeah, very
content.
cute.
I'm really excited, especially because of your background, because you're a scientist as well as you're hands-on working with dogs and people. I feel like that's a surprisingly rare combination. I feel like the fact that we are lacking that combination in the dog training world often leads to conflicts or to misunderstandings. And one thing that has been standing out to me about your content is that you're really good at breaking down research papers that we hear cited left and right and like pointing out their flaws or turning them into bite-sized pieces that an averagely intelligent person without a research background can understand. This is something that is or has been very challenging for me. I think I'm an averagely intelligent person, and I do read research papers, but it is really difficult for me to know. Like, okay, like I can recognize this is a journal Nature or whatever, right? Or applied behavior analysis, something or other. And okay, it's a peer-reviewed journal. Okay, like it's like well known, but still, I don't know. Like when I look at the paper and the article, I'm like, well, okay, but is that biased or is it not? Like the methodology they used, I don't know how to judge it. And so one thing I wanted to ask you, and maybe that is not possible, but do you have any tips for dog trainers or dog enthusiasts who see like some of those viral Facebook posts, right, that include some research paper or other or allude to it, and who are like me, and we're looking up that original research article and then we read it and then we're like, and now what?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, there is no easy or straightforward answer for that. I think it really depends on how intensely one would want to dig into this. So, a good measure, like you said, is the quality of the journal. But, how do you know that? And even that, there's some criticism, but in general, they're like really big, prestigious journals, Nature, Cell, they have a very what's called impact factor. And it's a thing, it's IF, like impact factor. And you can Google that, or you can probably put it in ChatGPT. It's like, what's the impact factor of whatever journal, right? And then you get a number, and then the higher the number, the bigger the impact factor, the more prestigious the journal. But it is in relation, like a number itself still won't tell you anything. You would just like check it out and use different journals. And what that means is the research that goes into it to be able to publish in a higher prestigious journal means the data is scrutinized a lot more, and a lot more data has to be shown in order to have conclusions being accepted by the wider scientific community. The data, the sample of the data has to be large enough, and then the variety of experiments done has to be convincing too. But by default, behavioral stuff, behavioral psychology or observations, by default, they will not ever get really into very high journals unless you have epidemiological studies, and then usually is like a huge, large sample size of patients, for example. But then they go rather into medicine journals. But anyways, so by default, the papers that we are looking at are probably lower quality of the journal because it is harder to have hard science with behavior that we observe. So that's just a mental note to kind of just to begin with, that there will be automatically some sort of flaws in that study just because it's so hard to find broad, widened conclusions from behaviors that you observe on top of that in a species that doesn't speak the same language.
That makes sense. Yeah.
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 And the other thing to then look for is, or anyone who wants to start out to be more science driven, I think instead of, unless you're used to and you actually enjoy reading papers, and sometimes you also have to pay for it, meta-analyses or reviews per se are a better start. Usually if there has been enough research been done with enough interest in the public eye, there will be at some point someone who has done a review paper, meaning review papers are a pain in the ass to write. I've been contributing to review papers myself, and you don't really get anything out of it because you, as a researcher or as an author of a review paper, you don't come up with your original ideas. You basically just review what has been done before you, or as you also study that topic. The reasons why researchers publish research papers is because they then can showcase that they have a really broad understanding of the topic, which is exactly what you might want as someone coming in and understanding what's been out there. So I would start with that. And basically you can still Google dog training methods and then potentially just put review as another keyword and see if there's anything that comes up. Usually they even say it as a category or in the title already. And then you just read what's been done there. And usually also because they don't discuss necessarily, depending on the review paper, but they discuss the trend in the industry, in the scientific field, what has been shown, what are contrary or contradictory results. And that will give you a much, much better idea where things at, rather than trying to figure out what is going on with like one single paper.
That's
And
like that in and of itself is such useful information. And
yeah.
or the people who contribute to review papers, are they less agenda driven than the authors of a particular paper that has been funded by who knows who? Or is that not a statement one could make?
I don't know. I think depending on where the money comes from in terms of like the overall project that that particular institute, that particular research group is working on, there may or may not be a certain bias. Like for the dog training industry, we have two review papers that are being published, and they come to different conclusions because they probably have a different kind of view on how to interpret the
Yeah.
results. Whether this is biased or not, or just human error, that's a different story. It will make you as a reader less likely to be super biased in your own conclusions because you still kind of read the results, and as you read through it, you usually be like, oh, wait a second, that doesn't make sense to me, or like, you're more likely to kind of come up with your own conclusions.
Yeah, and it gives you a broader overview, I guess, of
Yeah,
has this been replicated? Has it been shown 25 times or once, right?
right, right. And if
Oh,
you're lucky, the people that write the review will also highlight this. Ideally, they will say, this paper shows that, but that paper shows the opposite. Or
yeah.
this paper has been showing this, but is not aligned with other papers in different areas. So if it's a really good review, it will tell you these things. And then you can go from there and dig deeper into, okay, this some paper sounds interesting. And then you take that paper from the reference list and then look more into this. But at least you have an anchor of what to go
Yeah.
from.
That's such a great piece of advice. Thank you so much. I also feel like now that you say this, okay, I just lost my train of thought in the middle of
Happen.
the sentence. Oh yeah, because you mentioned like a good paper will say like this paper has found this, but this other paper found that. I guess like the less controversial something is presented, the more suspicious we should probably be, because it's probably a good sign if someone says or tells us openly, yes, this has been shown, but also, right? That tells us that the researcher or the person or the group of people, the research group writing this article is trying to be objective, right? Is would
Yeah.
be my interpretation, yeah.
Yes, for sure. Especially if the topic that you are reading a review on is something like behavior centered, where like we said at the beginning, it is much, much harder. If it's a topic on the effects of a certain drug on the development on cancer in a specific stage, well, that's a lot more specific, and potentially there has been a lot of studies that all kind of point in the same direction. So you're much more likely then to just read a review on like the known mechanisms because there is no controversy around the effects, but
Yeah.
potentially lack of, like then they will point out the gaps of understanding that researchers have not been able to answer yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Also in that same vein, like a lot of the time, there are many research papers out there that have been done, or studies that have been done on rodents, right? Or there are studies that have been done on humans. How relevant are those for dog behavior?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you can argue that it's not one-on-one, and people like who try to challenge me, and they will all say that it's rodents. And it's true. Like I say the same if someone was to come and say, like, but in zoo animals, we've seen this and this. Yeah, but they're zoo animals, right? But from the perspective that I'm coming from is I'm looking at not so much the behavior itself, but what is being driven by, caused by, triggering it in the brain or through hormones or whatever it is that has been known or has been shown to be preserved across species. Yes, there are like, certain things that are a little bit different, certain mechanisms that are probably different, and especially in the outcome of the behavior, it might be different. But the causal effects, how the brain kind of predicts and decides what to do might not be that different, because at the end of the day, we're all kind of still following the same broader rules of seeking pleasure, avoiding discomfort, preserving energy, and the brain areas for that are very much preserved. And then the other thing is, in order to understand whether or not this is relevant, well, then your own experience comes in, and you have to be able to say, okay, that's similar but different, or it's very much the same. Well, how does it apply? So critical thinking, obviously,
Yeah.
is a good role.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting. A while ago, I talked to a former colleague, Sharon Carroll, who's in Australia, and I asked her something about I don't even remember, like it was a rat study. And she mentioned that basically, or in her opinion, the problem with rodent studies, and I mean that I don't know, no, it's probably worldwide, is that there are different strains of rats that are bred for like specific, like different breeds of dogs, right? Characteristics. And then if you as a researcher want to show something, you put like you order online or whatever, or I don't know how you get your rats. You order like rats from that particular strain, and they're more likely to show that behavior. So like you're already biasing your results by the kind of rat you order. I was like, what? Like that's a thing? Like that's crazy.
It is a thing.
Actually a
And
thing?
it is a thing, yeah, because, like, for example, aggression. Let's take aggression,
Yeah.
right? There's a certain type of rats or mice, really. So they're by default, you already have like the mice, they're much easier to handle, they're much nicer. So if you
What?
want to
Really?
have a little bit, yeah. If you want to have a little more aggressive, there are some gene mutations that have been shown that then turn those mice a little bit more aggressive. So not necessarily aggressive per se, but the threshold to aggression is lower. And that helps you to obviously set up your experiment and kind of get some results. Otherwise, you would sit around and wait until you see something, and you need more and more and more samples or
Yeah.
mice in order to get like a certain sample size to show a certain effect size. So it
Wow.
helps, obviously. The bias there is, yes, everything seems to be a little bit more intensified, right? But if you then actually look into the mechanisms, usually what happens then is, okay, yes, this genetic mutation, for example, has been amplified in the effects of it. Now we can say this is potentially because of that gene, and then as a control, there's a knockout, and then there's some sort of titration effect, maybe, right? That's one. And then you have to be careful, obviously, not that not we don't know the gene for the genetic mutation in dogs, right? But we know it could be driven by a genetic predisposition. And the other thing for the bias, then the behavior is also intensified more likely, right? But I don't, that's what I'm saying. I don't think we should say, okay, the behavior is exactly like that, so we should expect it to see on dogs too, just because mice are also prey animals, most of them predators.
That's true.
But it does help us understand the mechanisms. And when you understand the mechanism, you can much more likely understand what could cause or set that cascade of whatever it is off. And that can help tremendously.
So what you're saying is basically, yes, that is a thing, but also it is more like turning up the contrast in an image to like be better able to see the mechanism than it is actually biasing your results.
Right. It's not giving you false positives or false negatives. It's just like
Yeah.
you said perfectly. It's like highlighting the contrast to make it more visible for researchers so that we can actually gain some understanding.
No, that makes sense to me. Yeah. Like that's actually, I mean, it's wild that we can do that and amazing.
It is, yeah. It's crazy.
All right. So like yeah, these were already like some really burning questions I've had for a long time. That is super helpful already. Now there are several directions I could take this conversation. I'm just gonna give you the fork in the road and you pick one because I know you don't have time forever and I could talk to you probably until tomorrow. So one thing that has been on my mind lately is European welfare laws, animal welfare laws. Austria just banned bite sports. I'm Austrian originally, and I think you're German originally. So I was wondering if you also had, like, if you're following these things and what your thoughts on that were. The other thing is, or one other thing is, like, the sadness of this divide in the dog trainer world, where it seems like I feel like we should all come together and share what we know and what we do. And those of us who know the science, those of us who have a lot of practical experience, and like come together. But I feel like that seems so difficult to do for many of us. And I don't know, maybe just commiserate or dig into human nature that drives that. And the last one is I've got a couple kind of random sciencey questions that you
Love
can
it.
give the answer to. Which of the three paths would you like to take? Choose your adventure.
Well, well, it's really up to you. I'm up for anything. I think maybe just to give you a high level thought, my thoughts on I don't follow in detail the European animal welfare, whatever law stuff is happening. And partly because I also don't want to. It's
Yeah,
upsetting. I get a lot of messages from people in all kinds of countries who see the laws changing and they ask me to help them write up like position statements from our side to show that whatever we're fighting has a reason that we're fighting for. But the problem is that by they, I mean everyone who moves in the direction of total bans of tools or anything that includes aversive control and trying to reduce that to zero, is seemingly operating on a pedestal as in taking the moral high stand.
yeah,
Because obviously it speaks to people as like I don't want to hurt animals, and that goes in line with all the other laws that we support, animal cruelty. So it just seems very natural to then also say, let's ban these tools without further education. And then, of course, we have politicians that respond to voters and the public opinion rather than them being very much informed or qualified to make these judgment calls.
yeah,
And unless there is more of a voice within the public who can understand that this is not going to solve the problem that we're trying to do, nothing will really change. It's going to be really, really hard as long as they're like, again, politicians behind that want to keep their position, that they're relying on the vote.
yeah.
And there will be loopholes, right? There will be loopholes for military dogs because at the end of the day, we can't
Right.
completely ban these kind of things for law enforcement, military, or any kind of working breed that is reliant on higher arousal aggression behavior at the same time need to cooperate with a handler. So it's really damaging, but as with everything else in history, not that I want it to be that way, but usually it kind of swings, the pendulum swings from one extreme to the other, and then eventually will swing back. I like to think that the swinging back has started, but maybe it's just because I've been now so active within that. Maybe this conversation has been like this for forever already, and there is just no swinging back inside yet. I like to think there is, because it helps me to kind of stay positive or motivated to do all that stuff.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I get that.
it's
I get that.
it
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's not great.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's leave that topic at that. Our main audience are probably not politicians with anything to say about this. So,
We need to, maybe you should bring on some politicians to your
oh my
podcast.
goodness. No, I don't think I could. I don't so. I don't think I have the resilience for that.
Mm. Yeah, good point. We probably need it.
But like, oh, but let me, okay, speaking of, because you said like there will be loopholes, law enforcement, let me ask you one of the geeky questions I had, because I listened to your interview on the Police Dog Radio podcast, and they asked about the police dogs in the police car who get
Mhm.
really excited when the siren comes on, right?
Mhm.
And I think you all established that that is not a behavior the dog is doing consciously, right? It's like drive leaking. They're vocalizing because they're so excited. It's like a classical association of siren comes on, I get out, I'm gonna get to like play my
Mhm.
favorite game, right?
Mhm.
So the dog is not conscious of this. And I think that happens in many scenarios, like in the pet dog world too. Like the Sheltie who like runs to the fence and barks. Shelties seem to love to bark. So I'm
Mhm.
not sure if they always know that they're barking or if they're just barking. So what I'm really curious about is it possible, assuming that this is actually a behavior the dog is not choosing to do, that is just going on, like sweating, for example, I don't choose to sweat, right? Is it like sweating, or can I implement a consequence that makes the dog aware of what they're doing and then change their behavior?
Yeah, it depends on a lot of things. The behavior, so there is a point where the behavior is conscious. There is a point where the dog clearly understands I'm in the car, I'm about to hop out, and I'm going to give everything I have because I hate being restrained in the car and I can't wait, right? What is much harder is the initial set off point where the siren goes on, and basically it happens so quickly that the brain basically just fires immediately. Everything that is associated, that the brain has associated with that sound, that in the first, I don't know, 1 second, 2 second, everything that happens, the dog jumping up to start barking, that might be involuntary. It's just gonna happen. But then the dog happily kind of chimes in consciously. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that's what I'm
Ah,
doing, right?
yeah, so like there's this
Um,
spike in arousal and then it goes down to a level where the dog is like more aware of what they're doing.
Right. The arousal not necessarily goes down. It still stays up, but it's the behavior then kind of reinforces itself and becomes much more conscious, let's say. It's really the initial spark of something that like as if you get startled, right? It's you don't
Yeah,
do it voluntarily, but if you get startled because you heard someone potentially breaking in, you still stay alert, and whatever you do after, you still kind of keep that like that's your decision making, right? But
right.
the moment kind of sets off and there's nothing you can do about it. And once it has been established, you're never going to get a dog that will not start initially be excited when the sirens go on. You're not going to, unless this kind of conditioning, potentially you can desensitize it, but then again, you would have to run the alarm, the
Right,
siren.
right. Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
so
Yeah.
what I was curious about is like what would happen if I put a bark collar on the like that's I don't have a police car, I don't have a siren, and I don't have a dog who has this problem, and I also wouldn't tell anyone to do that. That seems very unfair. But like technically, what if I put a bark collar on the dog in the police car?
Yeah, so what will happen likely is, and I'm pretty sure some people do that, is, they will initially start barking because they can't help it. And
Yeah,
then the bark collar will probably correct the barking and they will stop, right? They will stop because it was unpleasant.
exactly.
Um, but it won't necessarily change, again, the fact that the next time the dog will bark again. And even the barking itself can be initially reinforcing. So there will be the siren go on, the bark will happen, the dog will get corrected. And you do this 10 times, goes on, bark, corrected, goes on. Now this is being chained, and now the dog will bark and then immediately expect the correction to happen. But it didn't necessarily change the fact that the dog barks in the first place, or that the dog will never bark again in the future, right? This is
Like
because,
the first bark would still continue, that would probably continue to happen.
yes, it will continue to happen. And even without the siren, even on the police dogs, the dogs that get startled and runs to the door and or a dog that just like sits in the car and someone walks by and gets startled by it. Like a lot of those initial barks there, depending on the breed, they tend to be involuntary.
Yeah.
The bark color on top of it, could also malfunction. Sometimes it corrects, sometimes it doesn't. And now it
Right, right.
puts
Like, but like in like a hypothetical world, right, where it doesn't malfunction, would it eventually go away?
the barking.
Yeah, or
I,
never.
I don't know. I actually don't think so. I don't know how often the dog would have to kind of go through that. I think, again, the initial barking will probably stay. I don't think because it's involuntary, it's not under control of the dog. So why would it be going away through
Yeah,
punishment?
that makes
It will massively affect the behavior after, which, in the worst case scenario, depending on the dog, will then get frustrated. Frustration kind of could cause barking again, then the dog gets corrected again. So you kind of potentially create a really unpleasant loop, and then potentially dog gets aggressive, vocalizes
yeah.
through the aggression, will also get corrected again. And then you have a dog that is a mess as soon as
Yeah,
it
and I
comes.
mean, obviously, that is, of course, not the best practice, and that's not what we would want anyone to do. But I was just like, when I was listening to that episode, like, I wonder if it is an involuntary behavior, but it is not an actual reflex. Because it's probably not, right? Like startling is an actual reflex, but the barking is it's still a learned behavior, right? Because the dog has chained the tone of the siren with the really exciting behavior of getting to chase someone or something like that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it ends up being very similar to a true reflex if it has become very strong. Could we say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could say that. Yeah. The classical conditioning is just, obviously an unconditioned something within conditioned something. And
Yeah.
um that's just like fear conditioning. The you can desensitize it. So reflex you can't. Here you still can, but the number of repetition it requires
Yeah.
high.
Yes. And in any case, so the best practice if you don't want to have to deal with this is to like as you get your puppy, right, you already you just like get them used to the siren going on and off and nothing happens and sometimes something happens and something exciting happens and no siren, and so the siren is not the reliable or only predictor of the fun stuff, I guess, before
Right.
they ever like go down that road of making that connection in their brain.
Right, right. But it's very hard. Like if you can do all the things right as a puppy, and then you have this adult dog and have one single event that was
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
That might get you then already the dog that responds very sharply and very
yeah.
intense to it. It's very hard. It's a very hard situation.
Yeah, no, I imagine maybe you just get some earplugs and just be ready to plug them in anytime you need to turn on your siren.
Yeah.
That's kind of an off-topic question. I was just wondering, like I was like, that's not how I would do it. If it bothered me, I would desensitize the dog. I would try that. If I had like a place where I could park my police car and run the siren and nothing happens. But yeah, I was just wondering like if would that work or not? So thank
Depends.
you.
Yeah.
Completely hypothetical question. Would you like to answer another completely random question or
Sure.
rather talk about the Great Divide?
Up to you. Whatever you find. Whatever you want.
Hmm. Hmm. I talk about the divide way too much, so we can do that if we still have time left after.
Sure.
Another thing I've been wondering about is flooding. So when I got my puppy, she's 8 now, but when she was a puppy, I got her at 10 weeks and not at 8. Like usually I like getting puppies at 8 weeks, but because I was organizing a seminar and lots of stuff was going on, I was like, okay, like for these 2 weeks, I wouldn't have the time anyways. So like, let me get her 10 weeks. So I got a picture up in Amsterdam. She's Dutch.
Aw, she's just sweet.
And she's been in all over the world with me. But
Love that.
so like I told the breeder, hey, like can keep her for 2 more weeks. And like these are the socialization things that are going to be really important for me. Would you mind if you have a chance having her drag along or exposing her to those situations? Because like I know the younger the dog is, the more important the socialization. Like I sent them a list of like because I knew we would be traveling together. And back then I lived in Austria where dogs are allowed on public transport.
Hmm.
So I I was like, well, for example, if you have a train station or something like that nearby, if you get a chance, like take her, right? And then they took her and they sent me a video, like awesome breeder, sent me a video of the first time they went to the train station and they walked really close up to the incoming train. And you know how the train pushes air in front of it and it's loud. And she was by herself without other puppies or adult dogs. And on the video, I could see fearful behaviors, and they held her in place until the train had left and she relaxed. And then the video was kind of over, right? And back then, I was very much in the quote unquote fear-free camp. And
Hmm.
I thought to myself, oh my goodness, that's not exactly what I meant. Um, but also like I'm really grateful because they like it's an amazing breeder and I have an amazing dog, right? And so and I was also really grateful that they did that for me and worked with me on the things that I wanted. So I just and I also like was like, well, they know their line of dogs. It's a KMPV line. They know how to best socialize their puppies for sure to a larger degree than I do. So I thanked them and didn't like voice the fact that I was like, oh no. And so then they went back, I think the next day, and I got another video where they went into the same situation again, held the puppy again, and the fear response was much milder and it took way less time. And I got a third video where they did it a third time, and she just did not care. She was just there hanging out, being being chill, exploring. And she's been on trains and planes and whatever, and it has never been a problem, right? On a subway. Um, but like that was mind blowing to me, like those three videos.
Hmm.
And like I was really grateful that they did that. And also like I was so surprised because I had learned that quote unquote flooding doesn't work or flooding never works. Clearly that is not or that wasn't the case for this dog. For this one individual, it seems to have worked. I wonder, like, does it work for some dogs or individuals? Was it not about the flooding? Was the experience that I observed not flooding at all? Or was it just that the puppy changes so much at that age that she just responded differently? As a trainer, is there a situation when it makes sense to use flooding on purpose? That's not something that I would usually do. Like, I mean, I might, if I end up exposing the dog to or like if I put the dog in a situation and the dog is showing an undesired behavior, but I am controlling the situation and I might do something like CAT, right? The constructive aggression treatment, where I make the trigger go away, but only once the dog is calmed down. But
Hmm.
um, I probably wouldn't on purpose if the response is fear, place the dog into the situation and hold them in a position so they cannot move. Because I'd worry of make that I might make the behavior worse. But is that actually true? So yeah, is there ever, so I've been doing a lot of control unleashed protocols, for example, for a long time. And the downside I see with that is, are you familiar with control unleashed?
A little bit. People keep talking about it, but I never really looked very detailed into the step-by-step process.
So in my experience, it works, but it is a protocol that keeps the dog under threshold and gradually decreases the threshold.
Hmm.
So it has worked not for every single dog I've worked with in with that approach, but for a lot of them. But the downside is it takes a long time. And I feel like if I knew, for example, that I could flood a fearful dog and expose them to something they were afraid of, in 3 sessions, the dog would be no longer afraid of it, and I would charge the client much less because they only have to work with me for 3 sessions rather than for half a year. Then it seems to me that that would be justified because the dog's life quality, once they're no longer afraid, is going to be higher. The owner doesn't have to spend as much money, and the dog's lifespan is short anyways. So rather than continuing being afraid of the thing for 6 months until I'm like at my goal behavior with the control and leash protocol, right? For example, I would have reached that goal behavior much faster. So that would, for me, for my personal ethics, that would be if I knew that I could get to that goal quickly, even if it implied one or two stressful experiences for that dog,
Yeah.
I would be like, okay, that's okay because we're reaching the goal faster, and in the end, everyone's life quality is going to be higher faster.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic, and I think we have to be careful not to mix, for example, flooding. I don't know if there is a specific definition. The way I use flooding, the idea of it, if I talk about it, is that the puppy is overwhelmed to a point where it cannot come out of this batter and overwhelmed by multiple inputs of stimuli that the dog cannot handle. They kind of come out more lethargic and they definitely don't want to come back. And I think for most, that would be, I don't know, for example, going to a carnival with a puppy. I don't know if I ever would necessarily do that. And it could have certainly been flooding for your puppy in that situation. And I think for most puppies, it probably would have been a flooding situation. So flooding, I would say, is never good. But if it's good or if there's a positive outcome, then I wouldn't say it was flooding, right? But what is the difference here? Well, you got to know the dog, right? And you got to know what the dog is capable of. I think you got lucky probably, because I think with every other dog, this could have been a very traumatic experience, meaning the dog would not have liked to ever go back near a train again.
Yeah.
The other thing with control and leash, so that's one extreme. The other one is just a classic desensitization where you just keep the dog below threshold so that there is never any kind of fight or flight danger, whatever mode activated, and you just keep decreasing. Like that's a classic desensitization. And
Just,
then what
just as a quick side note, it is not, it's more complex than classic desensitization, but yes, yeah, I hear you.
yeah, let's just I don't know the complicated
Let's just say we're doing classic
yeah.
desensitization. Because
I
then you know
think
what we're talking about, yeah.
owners that don't follow some sort of more complex protocols would probably wanting to do classic desensitization by just exposing and not having the dog react in any way too intensely. Um, the other thing, or habituation also. Well, the other thing, um, for that situation then, and what's in between, basically, I think is this controlled intentional stress inoculation that
Ah,
might have happened with your dog that was short enough and manageable enough for your puppy to come out and say, okay, I'm stronger now than I was before because you created some level of resilience, right? Now, for example, handling drills. I do that with my puppy too. When I practice holding still, when I hold your collar and when you wiggle around and you kind of, have to work through it. You cannot
yeah.
fight your way out of it. And then once you're calm again, I let you go. But that kind of requires a good understanding of where the dog is, right? I think your dog was probably really, really young, and I think that was kind of rolling the dice a little bit, but also you have a Malinois, and they tend to be a little bit more resilient in certain ways. And if it's a good breeder, then they already come with like really good genetic predisposition and all that.
And I
Which,
mean, I think they do know their line of dogs really, really
right,
well. So
right.
like they probably knew what they were doing.
Yeah,
In a way that I wouldn't have known at the same with the puppy at the same age because like I'm not as familiar with the lines as they are. Of course not, right? Like I follow them, but not. I haven't lived with generations of them.
right.
Yeah.
Well, each puppy still can be different, and each puppy still can turn out be super sensitive despite having a good line or experience. So hence, I would say it was probably still rolling the dice a little bit. But the idea here is that, the stress inoculation, like the dog was very uncomfortable, and kind of was removed from the situation once it was over and then exposed again, same stress inoculation, same picture. It wasn't like all at once from different sides. It was that train coming with that sound, with that smell, with that whatever it is. And the other big thing here too is that the train wasn't attacking the dog, right? It's not like anything where there is all a dog that is afraid of humans or a dog that is afraid of other dogs, where there is direct feedback often coming from whatever the dog is exposed to, which
Yeah.
then makes the whole thing a lot trickier, right? Because whatever then the reaction is from what the dog is being exposed to can very much determine how your puppy then feels in the moment. But the train didn't care about your puppy because it was just doing its
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, and the
So,
puppy was already like super confident around humans, right? The humans at the train station, no problem. And the puppy was there with the couple that bred her. So there was social, like, even though the puppy would have preferred to go away from the train, there was like a sense of social security probably in some way. And I really like, yes, like, wow. I feel like you just put that, you like super simplified that for me. And I feel like I have a much better understanding of something that I've wondered about for the last 8 years.
I don't know.
Which is like, yeah, these are two, like the way you defined flooding, that makes sense to me. So like, and that you, how you distinguish it from controlled stress inoculation, by definition, it wasn't flooding because it didn't have adverse effects on her. And it was controlled stress inoculation because I could see in real, like, I mean, in a very short period of time, how she recovered and how
Mhm.
she then went back to like sniff and explore and her tail was up, right?
Yeah.
So clearly she wasn't stressed to the degree that you would call it flooding, where she completely shut down and became lethargic. It was way closer to like being held and not being allowed to um like
Avoid.
move until like to go back down on the floor until you relax into the
Mhm.
arms of your person. Yes, you probably are comfortable and you're not like perfectly happy here, but she probably wasn't scared for her life, right?
Right.
And so like human exposure therapy then is also probably controlled stress inoculation and not
Yeah.
flooding, right?
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
thought that was flooding, but it's not. So, or at least that's how I'm going to use it going forwards.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I used to throw it all into the same bucket in my brain. Of course it's not. Yeah. And yeah, thank you so much for this. And also shout out to games breeders. I'm sure they knew what they were doing. They're experienced breeders, and I don't think they would have taken her to the train station if they thought it was a bad idea. I'm pretty sure they knew that she could handle it. Maybe they didn't know exactly to what degree. I probably would have stayed at a much bigger distance and just let the
Yeah.
like see the train in the distance, right? That's plenty. We're just starting off
Right.
with a tiny puppy. We don't need to go like all the way up there.
Yeah.
That would probably also have been fine. But I mean, yeah, I think they probably knew what they were doing and that she was able to handle it. But yeah, thank you. Wow, I feel like enlightenment. Hey.
I love it.
Also, like that makes me think cat, like constructive aggression training. Everyone with their acronyms, it's so
I
insane.
know.
But
I
yeah, like
know.
that is also controlled stress inoculation because it is putting the dog basically at the threshold. Like it's not throwing the dog that can swim. Like, okay, no, that's not a good metaphor. I think all dogs can swim, right? Can they? Like it's not.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I think so. I haven't. I mean, I don't know. It's not throwing a creature who doesn't know how to swim into a swimming pool and expect them to either survive or not. It is like
Right.
going right up to the threshold and like maybe pushing a little bit, right? So like a
Yeah.
little bit out of the comfort zone, um, but not way, way, way out of the comfort zone. So
Right.
that the learner learns that, okay, I can be in this situation and nothing bad happens and life continues.
Yeah.
Um,
Correct.
and
And
that
same with
may,
humans.
yeah, and that probably can speed up the learning process, I assume.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in general, it's stress inoculation has many benefits, but makes the dog more resilient to future unknown stressors. And whatever the learning is like, it has some it gives it a little more confidence about, okay, even if I'm not comfortable, I'm still gonna be okay. And if you're done correctly, it will strengthen the bond. Most people are like so afraid that the dog will hold it against the owners when they're putting a dog in a stressful situation, but actually like this the sense of, and all these things, there should be It should be common sense, but most of the time it's not. There should be a good relationship between the dog and the owner. So the presence of the owner itself creates some sort of sense of security, right? So hence it will strengthen the bond a little bit more. So all these things come together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great segue into like if you would you just briefly talk about how you like one of or I think I've seen you talk about this a few times, that there is a big difference between learning the pleasure seeking and the um what's the other system called?
Avoiding
uh,
discomfort.
the avoiding of discomfort, and why it makes sense to have both of those be part of a dog's education or learning process, or another, or even a human's.
Yeah, because life doesn't work without it. Like it's mind-boggling to me how we can assume that, like in one way or another, the dog will learn to avoid certain things and always going to seek things. This is nothing new. This is biology, this is evolution. And just because when we overemphasize one thing doesn't mean the part of the brain that isn't responsible for avoiding just shuts off. It will actually create some problems potentially down the line. Plus, I think the most important thing or the most interesting thing is the learning level is it's just never complete. And there is nothing better for any brain, for us, you can imagine it for yourself too. If you have a full understanding in your world of what to do and what not to do, you feel much better about your situation than only knowing what to do because there's always like, but should I not be doing not do this? Like, there's some sort of gap. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you will always be directed as a dog, always be directed to the other behaviors and then the owner hoping the dog will make the right decisions. But what if not?
Yeah.
And either you have to manage the dog's world so crazy well that the dog will never make a wrong decision because you're on top of the dog. Well, then you kind of limit freedom automatically because
I
now,
would like to think that like some people do that, right? And they think they are doing the dog a favor. And
right,
maybe it's okay if you have the opportunity, if you have, I don't know, you live on a gigantic plot of land in the middle of nowhere. I mean, maybe that's fine. But like most
right,
people don't live in the middle of nowhere on a gigantic plot of land. They live in
right,
a New York City apartment, right? So
right.
that's not, it's not gonna work.
Not gonna work.
Yeah.
And it works for a limited time. Sometimes it's all you do to prepare the dog for certain learnings. If you have a puppy, you're not gonna come out with a punishment plethora of things that you're gonna do. It's like the first, I don't know, 6 months, my puppies is on reinforcement only, maybe redirecting. But nothing bad, right? So I'm constantly managing his environment, but it's exhausting. I cannot imagine having to do this for 13 years or 15 years, how long he's gonna live.
100 years.
Yes, correct. You're right. Um, and allowing him to understand who he is in this world, giving certain rules that apply both the reinforcement of good behaviors that I know he likes, the correction of behaviors that I cannot have him do. And then he chooses whatever else he wants to do with everything in between the gaps, right? And I think filling the gaps with who he is the part that is lacking for dogs that are on like reinforcement only because they never really get the chance to explore themselves because they constantly have to be directed in the right direction.
Mhm.
And it's just not complete. And I don't think it's complete for brain maturity. I don't think it's complete for agency and confidence. And I don't think it's the best life a dog can have because we kind of deprive them on what evolution and biology really optimize the brain to be understanding.
The argument I have heard made here is that, well, it is not necessary to create the situation artificially where the dog learns to avoid, because simply because life is going to throw situations like that at your dog anyways, right? So they are going to experience them anyways. I don't need to create more of them. You just said something that I found really interesting, is that the controlled exposure, that's what I heard. Please correct me if I misunderstood you. The controlled exposure to avoidance learning kind of generalizes and creates greater confidence in different situations in the future. How do we know that? And how does that work? That is also mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, so the one thing you never want to do is just like wait for something to happen to you because then you're just left with reacting to it rather than proactively setting up situations where you know at the end of the day you still want to put your dog up for success. Is it uncomfortable in the moment? Yes, but I still can make sure that my dog comes out better, right? Kind of like instead of it's a train station, it's a train, we know the train is coming, no train is leaving or stopping. It's very within that chaos of a train station and we're still somewhat controlled. And you could take it like if it was a very scary puppy or scared puppy or fearful puppy that would have been flooding and that would have been like saying, hey, well, this situation is going to come up anyway, so I'll just have my dog deal with it. Why would I have to expose my dog to any stressors otherwise? It's because if the dog is not prepared to deal with stressors or discomfort, your dog will come out traumatized from a train situation. And what can you do as a handler? I mean, that's what all dog training is about, to set them up for success. And controllability and predictability and communication are key that you do not have if you just wait until the world throws something at you. And that's one. The other reason is the stress response itself. And there's something that's called stress signatures, meaning the biological, neurobiological, chemical response to different stressors varies a little bit. But the overall theme of the HPA axis being activated, meaning the brain signals danger, cortisol, adrenaline, all this other stuff, the overall theme will stay the same.
Mhm.
Meaning there is no big difference between different stressors.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now what that means is if the dog has overcome one stressors and has experienced how it feels to be stressed and be okay, it is much more likely to generalize in other situations because it's the same feeling of being stressed and then hopefully being okay. Meaning your dog is much more likely to come out of this more confident if there is an unexpected surprise stress that the dog did not want to be in but had to be in.
Yeah.
So vet visits is a good example for that. And because the biological signature is mostly the same, it generalizes because stress response is unspecific and we take advantage of it. That helps us generalize the sensation of I'm stressed, but I'm going to be okay kind of thing. And it does not apply the same with reward seeking because reward seeking and that behavior is very, 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 very specific to the value of the reward. So
Yeah.
we can generalize it that much.
And the signature is learned. It's not innate.
It's not learned. The stress per se, you have it without learning, like
Yeah.
without even you knowing that you're stressed, you're going to be stressed. And the signature part here, um, the recovery part is somewhat learned because you're kind of strengthening the negative feedback loop,
Hmm.
meaning the stress is activated and then has to turn off. And through that stress inoculation exposure, you strengthen that. And that part, you could argue there's some learning aspect of it, but it actually kind of is learning because you kind of create a stronger connection to like the negative feedback loop, and that will then allow you to come out better or not as stressed in other situations.
So the learning part is basically the I'm gonna be okay part
Yes,
of it.
yes, yes, correct. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I love it. Uh,
yeah, me
ah,
too.
learning something. And also I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, and I know
Yeah.
you have an appointment, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I want to give you opportunity to plug your socials and your upcoming courses and your work. I know you have something coming up called the Triple Helix.
Mhm.
Please, tell everyone where they can find you, and if you want to keep talking after, we can do that. But in case you have to run, you can run.
Yeah. So the best way to find me is usually on Instagram. It's probably how you found me too, I would assume.
It was either Instagram or Facebook
Yeah.
or YouTube. Something popped up and I like watched it and I was like, wow, okay, follow this person.
Yeah, well, yeah, I hope this is how it usually goes. Ideally. So yeah, I'm on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Kin and Decoded or Dr. Melanie Uhde. I think I have sometimes my whole name and my website too. So there's a bunch of things that I put out. I have free guides, and for those who really want to dig deeper into this. A bunch of things are actually happening. The third cohort for my biggest flagship program, Triple Helix, is going to happen in October. So enrollment will start in September. And then basically everything we talked about today will go a lot more deeper into the science and nerdy part, plus applications with your dog. And then there are like smaller little programs happening too. Because I had a puppy with my friend Forrest, who has his brother. We will have a lecture series on how to raise a puppy,
Oh,
what
cool.
elements are important. Yeah. The first one will happen July 24th, so very soon, on pre-teething, social development of a dog, of a puppy. Yes, they are both working or like sports dogs, but at this point, there's just puppies. So we'll discuss a lot of those, how to engage and what to do and don't do with puppies. And then as they age, we will do this in multiple series and kind of provide
I love it.
insights, yeah, insights, videos, a little bit of science sprinkled in for those who are interested in that kind of process. It's very process oriented. And then I have another series happening, what I call the Canine Longevity series. So I will address basically more like from a welfare holistic point of view, outside of the actual training, what it means to live a good life. And the first section will be on physical exercise, how the body, exercise, movement affects the brain, helps with anxiety, since so many dogs suffer from that. And then there will be one on sleep, on nutrition, on emotions, 1, 2, 3, 4, and one that I can't think of right now. And they will happen throughout the next 6 months or so. But they're all, well, actually, they're not on my website yet because I'm planning all these things, and then it takes me too long to put this all together. But they're definitely eventually on my Instagram. And the best way actually to stay tuned with everything is just to sign up for my newsletter, because then you get the emails, and usually the emails people will know first when things happen.
And I do have to say, I rarely read newsletters, but yours is actually really good. You're a really good writer,
Oh,
and
thank
it's
you. I
enjoyable
enjoy
to
it.
read them. Like I remember the airport one with the cake pops.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that you remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do enjoy that and tie it to daily situations, because I think that helps people understand that it's not just the formal setup of a training, it's everything around it that drives us, is also driving our dogs.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll put all your links into the show notes, and I'll run them by you. So
Yeah, yeah, perfect. If you ever want to do part two, because you have more things that you want to discuss, we can definitely find another part two
uh,
session where keep it open-ended, and then we can talk more.
cool. I would love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for making time for me. I
Yeah.
hope your DMV
Oh,
adventures
I'm
quickly.
probably, yeah, I hope so too.
Still have a driving license that does not expire. The Austrian ones don't expire.
I
So,
don't think I actually don't know if they expire here, just because I have to transfer it from Georgia.
oh yeah.
That's why. But yeah, they did not accept my German one, so I had to. I
Uh,
mean, yeah.
I never asked.
That's that's not a bad strategy.
Okay, well, I won't keep you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, looking forward to connecting again.
Yeah, keep me posted. You had good questions. If there's anything else ever, then just reach out.
Thank you. You too.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hit like and subscribe, and if you're enjoying this podcast, share it with a friend or take a few minutes to leave me a review. Those really help spread the word. Also, check out my library of free dog training resources at adventuredogsanarchy.com/free stuff and on youtube.com/@adventure-dogs and my membership program at patreon.com/adventuredogs. I'd love to have you. Happy training and stay dangerous.